Hello, I'm Andrew Budd. I'm founder and CEO of London-based iProov. We're a 70-person company, a world leader in establishing the genuine presence of remote users online, whatever their device or technology. Today, I want to talk to you about the future, about the framework for the future of digital identity. We're at an enormously exciting moment, and I want to share with you some of the developments that are driving that forward. So to a fintech community, I don't need to spend too long explaining how rapid the move to online digital from more traditional methods has been. Clearly, COVID and the lockdowns that have ensued have dramatically accelerated this trend. I think we've seen years of progress in the move to digital over a period of months. Let's just remind ourselves of what the factors driving this change have been. Firstly, what we're finding is that online digital solutions can be much faster as a process to onboard customers. Instead of a trip to the branch, a few clicks on a mobile phone and the job is done, taking hours of work down into minutes. And correspondingly, enormously convenient. Why would a customer go to their local high street, except maybe for a little social contact with which we've all been starved, when they could do it from the comfort of their desk or their couch? And thirdly, from an operational point of view, it's enormously more efficient to do it digitally and preferably automatically. The cost to acquire new customers is enormously reduced. It leaves a digital trail. The documentation trail is easier to manage, and it's much easier to manage consistent processes between different products, between different parts of the organization, and across multiple regions. So the case for going digital has been and continues to be ever more totally compelling. One of the central and most important challenges in going digital, however, is the establishment of trust. As soon as the customer is no longer in front of a bank teller or trusted employee, how can we trust a user, and how can the remote user assert that trust? The key element, therefore, is in a digital identity space, which is really all about dossiers of attributes of a person, how to bind that dossier of attributes to a real physical human being, and how to enable the user to assert that identity and by themselves and only by themselves in a secure yet usable way. What options does the user have to assert trust in their identity? Let's look at it from the other point of view, from the bank's point of view. How can the organization be assured that it is genuinely a legitimate user, who is accessing the service? And up until now, as long as online was a bit of a gadget, a bit of a sideshow, it wasn't worth the while of organized crime and state actors to really invest very large resources in cracking it. Well, as a result of the acceleration given by COVID and the mass migration online, that's not true anymore. As online digital is becoming the primary channel to interact with services, so all organizations are increasingly vulnerable to attack by criminals and state actors who are seeking to impersonate their customers. And correspondingly, customers and citizens are increasingly vulnerable to the dreadful consequences of such impersonation attacks, from fraudsters leading to their identity being compromised. And therefore, it is absolutely crucial to have a highly secure and completely effortless identity verification and authentication for everyone. And that needs to be done across the entire life cycle. Now, we can say this is a known problem, that there are established ways of doing this, that we've got methods today that are good enough. Well, good enough has up until now been focused on compliance with PSD2, AML provisions, and other financial due diligence. And that focus on compliance has in some cases given rise to what we might describe as security theatre. And as that was okay, as long as online was a limited channel to a limited demographic who were perhaps prepared to suffer some degree of friction and hardship to get the benefits of online. Not true anymore. Today, as this becomes the primary channel to the user, it's the good is no longer good enough. that the security and usability trade-off is no longer acceptable. So solutions have to be better than good enough. The era of snapshot selfies, bit of blinking, a video chat, it's gone. It's over. They are too time consuming. They introduce too much customer friction. They're too operationally inefficient and inexpensive, and they're just not secure enough against the kinds of attacks that we're facing. So we need to move to sources of trust for faces that are better than simple motion-based or simple image analysis. And additionally, the fraud defenses need in future to evolve, because in today's world, solutions must not just be secure, they have to be resiliently secure, as well as being highly usable and also private. We mustn't forget, privacy is now a mainstream requirement, making it high on both the user's agenda and on the agenda of financial services organizations. So good is not good enough. Excellent is now the minimum bar. And one reason is that we're seeing a rapidly increasing focus on the need for digital inclusion. That methods that kind of some people could access and some people could use and worked better with some than others, that's gone. It's no longer acceptable. We're seeing a lot of responsible financial institutions really placing a focus upon mitigating bias. Bias doesn't just mean bias around ethnicity, features or skin tone, but also gender, but also ability and also age. And mitigating bias against all of those, including devices, including age, has all sorts of implications. It's really important that this entire solution be built to mitigate that bias and to measure the performance of the system to ensure that those mitigation capabilities are being successful. It's not enough to say, well, we designed it to be free of bias and it should be okay. If you take bias seriously, you have to measure it. And there are a number of different ways. Clearly, machine learning algorithms have to be trained and monitored to ensure that they don't exhibit bias. But one way of mitigating bias, particularly against economic circumstance or age, is to ensure that there is no prejudice about devices. That inclusion does not permit discrimination based on devices. That you can gain access to this great identity verification and assertion mechanism, providing that you've got a smartphone for which you paid more than 500 or whatever. That's not okay. To be truly inclusive, solutions have to work across all the devices that all your customer base are likely to possess, no matter how expensive they were, and even including laptops. And finally, inclusion also means creating customer experiences that are reassuring to the user, that help combat the fear of the user, both in the process and in the underlying trust-based activities that are going on behind, and also respect their dignity. A surprising number of people don't like to see themselves mirrored in a smartphone when actually what they're trying to do is a financial transaction. They didn't want to do a photo session. They'd have made themselves up. My old aunt would never go on a Skype call if she hadn't put on her makeup first. That is not an imposition we wish to impose upon people, and I think we have to be respectful of that when we're thinking about inclusion and exclusion. And really, inclusion is about usability. Usability is the key. These systems have to be usable by people aged 9 to 90, whatever their origin, whatever their cognitive ability, and whatever their degree of skill with technology. And the ability to deliver that is one reason why cloud-based biometric face authentication is beginning to come into its own. Firstly, why biometric? Well, because biometric is about tying identities to the physical human being. Anything that isn't biometric is about tying identities to things or knowledge. Biometrics ties identity to the person. Why face authentication? For a number of reasons. Every personal device has a front-facing camera nowadays, so the sensors are ubiquitous. It is the most usable and passive of biometrics. I look at my device, it looks back at me. It couldn't be simpler. Thanks to advances over the last 5 years in machine learning, it works extraordinarily well. And critically, the face biometric is the single biometric that ties a person's government issued identity to the person. The face biometric is the link, and therefore face biometrics are unique in providing access to the identity corroboration provided by photo IDs. I think there are other aspects to it when we move towards reauthentication, that once somebody has been appropriately enrolled through an identity proofing process, the face is already there. It was the face on their photo ID. It can now be reused for future authentications. So the problem with many biometric solutions is enrollment. And the great thing about faces is, given that faces have to be used during the enrollment process, the enrollment for authentication is a done deal. It's a solved problem. So the moral of the story is that biometric face verification dramatically improves digital onboarding. Automated biometric face verification is simpler, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it delivers a true bind between the credential data and a person. And particularly, it can provide a mechanism that provides as secure a bind between a human being and their photo ID as an in-person encounter would. Now, that's not my judgment. That's the judgment of the EIDAS auditors, who have permitted the use of this technology to deliver to Assert to create a qualified signature, and the regulatory requirements on the creation of qualified signatures says that the security has to be as high as an in-person encounter. So with modern technology, we can produce we can remotely produce an identity, a trusted, reusable digital identity with the same level of confidence as an in-person encounter. And it delivers at that point, having gone through this onboarding process, it delivers a trusted and trustable, reusable digital identity built on a genuine document and a genuine face, creating a genuine identity for a genuine person. And when that's done, all sorts of freedoms become possible. All sorts of liberties and capabilities open up both for the citizen and for the financial services organization. What are some of these? Well, in the life cycle of a user within a financial services institution, the assertion of the authentication process enabled by biometric face verification can start with the simple process of access to an account, access to information, and in the event of authentication, either to permit a transaction or for a step up of using strong customer authentication under the European PSD2 regulation. These classic methods of these classic uses for authentication are a given. But in addition, what we find is that very often accessing new products and services, if they're not based upon existing well-structured digital identities, can demand that the user has to go through the whole enrollment phase all over again. That if you want to sell them a mortgage, they have to enter a bunch of details which they know already and which could be asserted if you could securely bind that user to those already enrolled credentials using their face. A third application is that many regulations require ongoing, repetitive due diligence to periodically return and maintain a digital identity to ensure that all the data is still up to date. That is a key moment of threat. If an attacker can access that time, then they can change key personal details about a person and effectively repoint that identity in a completely different direction. So although it can be a rather routine process, in reality, it's a high threat point and has to be defended in a high security way. And that's also true about all aspects of identity maintenance. Confirming a changes to address, rebinding a device, for example. Rebinding a device is a very common requirement, whether you bought a shiny new one or, like my son a few weeks ago, you drop yours down the toilet and it stops working. You don't want to put the user through the whole torture of a re-enrollment again when you could pick up their existing credentials, providing that you can be certain that you're rebinding that credential to the same physical human being. Now, there are dangers. Let's look at some of the threats. The threats to onboarding and authentication, onboarding particularly, comes from two places. Firstly, there's a threat to faces, and that's true throughout the biometric life cycle. And during onboarding, there are threats to documents. And in general, what we're talking about are forgeries, counterfeits, and what we call in the document case, genuine synthetics. In other words, genuine documents issued by genuine authorities in the names of imaginary people. The great thing, and the relationship between these two is very critical, because of course imaginary people can have documents, but imaginary people can't present their faces, not in a genuinely present way. And therefore the face becomes a key element of defense in the overall identity life cycle. Let's just have a look at what one needs to do in order to ensure trust in remote faces. You've got 3 tests that have to be undergone. Firstly, you have to check that you're looking at the right person. In other words, that the person in front of the remote person in front of the camera resembles the photograph in the trusted document. And today, that's very much of a solved problem using face matching technology to prevent wrong people successfully mounting imposter attacks. Secondly, one has to make sure that we're not looking at an artifact, that is a physical object thrust in front of the camera that looks exactly like the right person, but is actually a photograph or a video on a screen or a mask or something like that. And these forms of presentation attack need to be defended against using liveness technology. And finally, and most insidiously, it's essential to prevent against the presentation of highly realistic synthetic videos of a genuine looking victim, which never pass anywhere near the camera of the device, but are digitally injected either into the local software or into an online API or by some means through a cloned device. So that as far as the financial institution is concerned, everything about this transaction is believable. What looked like a real person presented themselves, but there was no real person. They weren't there, and they certainly weren't there in real time at the time at which the transaction took place. If all of those 3 things take place, then one has a source of genuine trusted faces. What about sources of genuine trusted identity credentials? Well, there are really 3 sources of them, which give different levels. The gold standard today are online databases. Online databases are great because, and these are examples of this might be, for example, the government of Singapore, whose national digital identity platform is a complete database of all Singapore citizens, which can be used in an appropriate and regulated manner for all sorts of purposes. In the United States, the Real ID Act has effectively turned the DMVs, the driving license authorities, into sources of identity, and each of them has a database which, technically speaking, is online, but as yet none of them hasn't really opened out into a source. Why are online databases great? Well, they're secure because the image is trusted and can't be tampered with, and they're very usable because the user doesn't have to do anything in order for that information and that imagery to be made available during the identity proofing. So tick for usability, tick for security, tick for as a solution. Well, in most places that opportunity isn't available yet, and so a very good alternative is the use of biometric identity documents, which have within them a chip conforming to the ICAO 9303 International Biometric Identity Chip Standard, which accounts for the vast majority with passports issued by the vast majority of states, and in some parts of Europe, increasing number of parts of Europe, national identity cards and even driving licenses. Because the information in these documents is signed by the issuing authority, they are highly secure sources of trust. But it does involve a certain amount of user interaction because the chip in the identity document has to be read using the NFC reader available on most, not all, but most smartphones, whether Android or Apple. So it's a little bit of an old process. It can take 35, 40 seconds to accomplish. It's very secure. It's a bit clunky, but it works, and it's great, and it's nearly ubiquitous. Of course, many countries and many contexts don't have that option. Biometrically chipped identity documents are not available to many citizens in many countries. So, for example, in the United States and the United Kingdom, if one does not demand that a customer presents their passport, normally the document will be the driving license, and the only way to capture the information of a driving license is by optically imaging it. It works. It's very widely used. It provides a tremendous resource for online onboarding, but there are challenges with it. It's not a frightfully user-friendly experience. And despite the best efforts of some really great firms in this sector, there are some well-known security vulnerabilities in this process. So we have a number of choices for onboarding, for remotely, digitally onboarding digital identity and creating digital identities. So once those identities have been created, what do those architectures look like? Well, today, what we're seeing are three fundamental architectures for conventional digital identity. On the one hand, we have centralized digital identity. And when we talk about digital identity, remember, we're talking about what is fundamentally just a dossier of information about a person, just a set of facts about a person held by a trusted organization who dispenses them upon the request and authorization of the user. And these architectures can either be centralized. So in the case of GovTech in Singapore, there is one national digital national digital identity platform for the whole of the country. It has to be held very securely. It's obviously a honeypot, which is why the Singapore government guard it with such care. Then there are federated models. A federated model doesn't have a single source. These are a networked swarm of databases, each of which contain information about a proportion of the community, and which are networked together such that a request can be directed to the appropriate database via fundamentally a single API, or if necessary, a single trust framework. A good example of this is the increasingly successful eIDAS framework in Europe. eIDAS is implemented by law across the whole of the European Union, and indeed as the United Kingdom as well. There are multiple trust service providers in each country, and eIDAS trust credentials issued by a certified provider in one country must be recognized by governments in another country. And organizations like SK Identity Solutions in Estonia are providing credentials which are recognized not just throughout the Baltics, but by governments throughout the whole of Europe. On the other side, we have quite a different model, which was pioneered by Evonim and others, in which there is no trust service provider, in which the user is their own trust service provider, and in which wallets are built up containing all of the identity credentials of a person, and the person is self-sovereign, and they can control what is in that wallet and how it is dispensed to third parties. In all cases, however, there is a key link, which is that these are facts about people, and at some point a human being has to assert the facts and has to prove their right to assert those facts. So in all cases, face biometrics are what link the individual to their identity attributes, whatever the underlying architecture. So where are we going from here? We think that the next stage in the evolution of identity architectures, the fourth stage, will be the evolution towards distributed identity and verifiable credentials. This has been a matter of some discussion and debate, mainly in standards organizations and in experimental labs for quite some time. The exciting aspect about this model of distributed verifiable credentials is that it is an open and interoperable environment. Fundamentally, the idea is that on the one side, on the left there, represented, for example, by the university mortarboard, are issuers of facts, of isolated facts about people. Organizations like universities who can issue a credential like a graduation certificate and can attest to its veracity. On the right, you have organizations that need to know about these things, that need to be reassured of facts about the citizen. And in the middle, in the center of it, you have the citizen. Now, the citizen collects and brings together these verifiable credentials, and upon request and upon demand can provide a selection of such information to the relying party. This model has some tremendous advantages to it. You don't have honeypots. The issuers of credentials are distributed, and their power is to assert facts that they already know. These models permit the selective disclosure of attributes so that privacy is protected by not providing whole filing cabinets of data to a relying party when only one fact is desired. And modern technologies of zero knowledge proofs mean that it's possible for a relying party to ask a question and get a yes/no answer out without having to receive excessive amounts of information. This model places the person effectively as the issuer of their own digital identity, but it's open. This whole mesh is bound together by this whole. In one model of this whole mesh is bound together by a number of standards written by the W3C consortium. The W3C consortium on these standards are called verifiable credentials. Now, up until now, this has been a little bit academic, but it's not going to be academic anymore, because we are rapidly seeing the demand for COVID vaccine and test certificates is driving inexorably and rapidly the need to roll out an architecture that looks very much like this on an international basis and fast. So you have initiatives like the Good Health Pass initiative, Good Health Pass Collaborative, of which iProov is a founding supporter, which is seeking to use these W3C standards to provide a distributed identity, verifiable credential infrastructure, which will enable test labs, national, regional, and local health organizations, potentially even vouched self-testing, to create health attribute credentials, which the user can then assert in privacy-protecting ways, both locally, nationally, and for international travel. We believe that what lies at the heart of this architecture is the person, and the way that the person binds this otherwise very information-led infrastructure to themselves is face verification. For that reason, we think genuinely present faces will be the single most important verifiable credential in this whole architecture as it evolves and moves forward more rapidly than any of us could have imagined, impacting fundamentally the way that fintechs and financial institutions create, capture, share, and rely on digital identities. So to conclude, we see that digital identity is a rapidly evolving framework for the future, that what was good is no longer good enough, that security, excellent resilient security and usability for inclusion must be brought together into solutions that are not just good, but are excellent in every respect, that secure trusted IDs already created during the onboarding processes for the purposes of compliance can and will be reused to secure the user throughout their user journey in all the very many use cases in which strong authentication is required. And we will see the underlying architecture for those processes evolving to expand, to build not just on classical digital identity trust services embodied either in centralized or federated or self-sovereign identity structures, but in a whole new model based on verifiable credentials and distributed identities. And I think that will mark a huge step on this enormously exciting journey that we are embarked on. I think many of us, I personally, to close, many of us come into the identity world as neophytes. I spent 25 years helping to build the mobile communications industry. We had a dream, and that dream came true, of making universal mobile communications ubiquitous. Now imagine if we can make universal trusted identity ubiquitous. That's going to be an even more exciting and even more world-changing enterprise. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure speaking to you this morning. Please do come and visit the iProov booth. where we can talk to you about the contribution of genuinely present face biometrics to digital identity and its role in the fintech community. Thank you very much.